He'd learned to trust Duke's instincts, and today, they were screaming. A calm summer afternoon in Marion Falls, a grocery store parking lot, and one bark. That changed everything. Within minutes, a suspect would run, backup would swarm, and a canine's nose would lead to something no one was ready for. A life hanging in the balance inside the trunk of a car. This is the story of how a split-second decision, and a dog's unshakable focus, turned an ordinary day into a rescue you'll never forget. After a decade on the job, Officer Jack Raw had learned one thing, for certain: Duke never barked without a reason. That deep, sharp sound slicing through the quiet hum of the grocery store parking lot wasn't just noise, it was a signal flare. Duke's way of saying, something's wrong, and time's short. The day had started without any drama. Clear skies hung over Marion Falls, and a light breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, mixed with the smoky hint of grilled burgers from somewhere nearby. Jack and Duke had spent the afternoon on routine patrol, chatting with shop owners, keeping an eye on the town's pulse. Most days in small-town policing were like that. Steady, predictable, until they weren't. Now, Duke's entire frame had gone rigid. His weight shifted forward, muscles tense, ears locked on a cluster of parked cars at the far edge of the lot. Without thinking, Jack's grip on the leash tightened. "What do you see, partner?" he murmured, scanning the direction of Duke's stare. At first glance, everything looked normal, just a row of sedans and SUVs tucked beneath the lengthening shade of the strip mall's awning. A couple of shoppers were loading groceries. A mother was fastening her toddler into a car seat. The late afternoon air still carried its easy calm, but Duke's body language told another story. He stepped forward deliberately, then again, his movements slow and predatory, as if tracking something beyond human perception. Jack moved with him, one hand resting on the edge of his holster, not because he expected trouble right away, but because Duke's instincts had never been wrong. By the time they reached the far corner, Duke had locked onto a charcoal grey sedan. It sat perfectly in its space, paint flawless, aligned neatly between the white lines. If you passed by, you'd assume its owner took pride in keeping it spotless. Then Duke's bark erupted, sharp, rhythmic, and urgent, each burst hitting Jack like a punch to the chest. A man at a nearby truck glanced over. "Dog spot a squirrel or something?" the man called with a half smile. Jack didn't respond. He edged closer to the sedan, studying the tinted rear windows. No movement, no sound. Still, Duke's barking intensified, a low rumble vibrating in his chest between each explosive note. Crouching as if to retie his boot, Jack stole a glance at the license plate. "Dispatch, Unit 12, he said quietly into his mic. "Run a plate for me." He read off the number. The answer came fast, registered to Daniel Keats. Local address, no active warrants. Vehicle clean. "Copy," Jack replied, though his eyes stayed fixed on Duke. The dog's nose pressed into the seam of the trunk, nostrils flaring, body taut like a drawn bow. Jack's pulse quickened. Duke wasn't just alert, he was locked in. Scanning the lot again, Jack noticed a man standing still near the parking row's edge. Baseball cap pulled low, hands buried in his hoodie's front pocket, despite the mild day. His gaze flicked between Jack and the sedan. Before Jack could speak, Duke's bark dropped into a growl, head snapping toward the man. The stranger took a slow step back. "Afternoon," Jack called casually. "That your car?" The man hesitated. "It's my cousin's. He's inside picking up something. I can move it if you need." Jack gave a faint smile. "No need to move it just yet. Mind showing me some ID?" The man shifted, one foot angling backward like he was measuring the distance to his escape route. Duke's growl deepened, hovering between a warning and a promise. "Sir, I'll need you to stay right there," Jack said evenly. The man's shoulders twitched, but he didn't answer. A passing minivan slowed, its driver craning to look. More shoppers began to linger, phones appearing in hands. The tension in the lot thickened. Jack knew this was the kind of moment that could tilt toward panic, and panic was unpredictable. With A subtle hand signal. He positioned Duke between the man and the car. Every second stretched thin. Something was in that sedan. Something Duke could smell, even if Jack couldn't see or hear it yet. Jack's eyes flicked to the trunk again. He thought about probable cause, about Duke's certification, about the certainty growing in his gut. The car was locked, the windows sealed, shadows swallowing the interior. Whatever was inside had Duke laser-focused. "Dispatch," Jack spoke into his mic. "Send another unit to my location." "Copy, Unit 12. Backup en route." From 15 feet away, Jack could feel the man's nervous energy, his hands flexing inside his hoodie pocket. "Mind if I take a quick look inside?" Jack asked, keeping his tone conversational. The man's jaw worked, as if wrestling with words he couldn't voice. "Like I said, it's not my." Duke's bark cracked through the air like thunder. The man flinched. And in that instant, Jack knew, without question, Duke had just crossed the line from suspicion into certainty. Whatever this was, it was serious enough to turn an ordinary afternoon in Marion Falls into the first line of a report people would read for years. Backup was only minutes away. But minutes could feel like an eternity when your canine partner was riding the edge between patience and pounce. Jack's hand felt the leash tremble with each surge of muscle through Duke's body. This wasn't just alert mode. Duke was locked into that razor-thin space where waiting could shift into action. In a heartbeat, Jack shifted his stance, eyes moving between the man in the cap and the gleaming charcoal sedan. He'd seen tense situations before, but this one, it had a way of crawling under his skin. The man's posture told Jack more than the guy likely intended. His feet were angled as if ready to bolt, shoulders wound tight, chin tucked just enough to keep his expression hidden. People trying to act relaxed usually overdid it. This one wasn't even trying. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right there," Jack repeated, his tone sharper now. The man's eyes flicked toward the main road, then back to the sedan, and finally to Duke. The dog, as if on cue, stepped forward, one deliberate move, his gaze locked, body low, a growl rumbling from deep within his chest. Jack had seen that exact stance in training right before Duke launched. It was the canine equivalent of resting a hand on a weapon, silent, unmistakable warning. More cars were pulling in, the lot steadily filling with late afternoon shoppers. A woman with 2 kids slowed as she neared, drawn by the tension in the air. Jack gave her a subtle wave to keep moving. The last thing he needed was curious bystanders getting too close. "Look," the man said at last, his voice shaky. "This is just a misunderstanding. I don't know why your dog's acting like this. I can open the car for you if you want," Jack cut in, calm but unyielding. "We'll wait for backup before anyone touches the vehicle." Standard procedure. It wasn't technically required, but it bought him time and control. He wasn't letting this man set the pace. Duke moved again, circling toward the rear of the sedan, nose pressed to the seam of the trunk. His tail stayed rigid, not a hint of wagging, every ounce of focus fixed on the task. Then he stopped and delivered a single, sharp bark, not the urgent volley from earlier, but a precise, deliberate marker. Jack knew exactly what that meant. Duke wasn't speculating anymore. He was certain. The radio on Jack's shoulder crackled. "Unit 12, backup, is 2 minutes out." "Copy," Jack said, his gaze locked on the suspect. The man shifted his stance again, yes, slightly, but with a new edge of desperation. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't come close to genuine. Jack's gut tightened. 10 years in the field had taught him to trust that feeling. Piece by piece, the situation was lining up. Duke's unshakable focus, the man's subtle tells, and the way he kept inserting himself into the moment, instead of stepping aside like any truly uninvolved person would. The rising wail of sirens drifted closer. The man's gaze snapped toward the sound, and Jack caught the instant his patience broke. Without warning, the man spun and ran. "Stop, right there." Jack's command cracked across the lot. Duke lunged, the leash snapping taut in Jack's grip. "Stay." Jack barked, and the dog froze mid-stride, torn between instinct and obedience. The suspect vanished around the corner toward a side alley, but backup was already hitting the Lotta Patrol SUV sliding in from the opposite side. One officer peeled away in pursuit, while the other moved toward Jack. "What's going on?" the newcomer asked. Jack motioned toward the sedan. Dukes locked onto the trunk. "Runner claimed it belongs to his cousin." "I'm not buying it." The officer bent to peer through the darkly tinted windows. "Can't see much." "Exactly," Jack said. "But Duke's telling me something's in there and we need to find it fast." The bystanders had sensed the shift, their chatter softening into murmurs. Jack moved closer to the trunk and gave the order, "Check it." Duke circled again, nose skimming low, before returning to the same spot at the trunk's seam. He sat hard, his final, unequivocal alert. The other officer nodded. "Probable cause is solid. We can open it." Jack's fingers tightened around the latch. He glanced at Duke, who was nearly vibrating with anticipation, ears forward, muscles taut. The latch clicked. For a heartbeat, the parking lot seemed to hold still. Jack lifted the trunk halfway. The stale air hit first, then a sound so soft it could almost be imagined, a muffled thump from inside. Jack froze. "You hear that?" the officer whispered. Jack nodded once. "Yeah." Duke's head dipped, nose pressing toward the noise. His tail twitched, not in excitement, but with the measured precision Jack had only seen when the dog was tracking something alive. Inside, under a worn, frayed blanket that took up nearly the entire trunk, lay a shape. One corner of the fabric was stained dark. Jack's pulse kicked higher. "We don't move this until Ems is on standby," he said. His voice low, but urgent. Officer Rasheda was already on the radio, calling for paramedics and more units. Duke stayed planted, guarding the trunk, his gaze locked on the hidden form. Jack knew they were standing at the edge of something far bigger than they'd expected. Even with years of experience, he couldn't yet tell how deep the trouble ran or how close they were to changing a child's life forever. For now, all he could do was trust his partner, who had never once steered him wrong, and wait for whatever came next. The air around that open trunk seemed to weigh more than it should. Jack could hear the faint hum of the grocery store's rooftop air conditioning units and the occasional clatter of a shopping cart, but all of it seemed far away. His focus had narrowed entirely to the blanket-covered shape in the trunk ahead. It didn't belong there. Nothing about it looked like something an ordinary shopper would toss in with their groceries. Beside him, Duke sat stiff and alert, eyes fixed forward. Every now and then, the dog lifted his nose, inhaled deeply, and let out a low, steady growl that sent a chill crawling up Jack's arms. Nearby, backup officers spread out, creating space between the scene and the curious onlookers. Officer Carla Mendes stepped closer, her gaze sweeping over the vehicle. "Think it's a body," she murmured. Jack didn't answer immediately. He'd learned long ago that jumping to conclusions could send you in the wrong direction. "I think Duke's telling us there's something alive in there, or was not." Too long ago, Carla glanced at the dog. "He's locked in. Not like when he picks up old clothes or food wrappers." Jack crouched, lifting the edge of the blanket just enough to reveal a battered suitcase wedged inside. The zipper was partly broken, teeth bent, as if someone had forced it shut. That was enough for him to stop. "We wait. I want Ems right here, before we touch it." The paramedics arrived within minutes, gear in hand. The lead medic, Grant, who'd worked with Jack before, glanced from the suitcase to Jack's face. "What are we looking at?" "Could be nothing," Jack said evenly. "Could be the reason Duke won't take his eyes off this car." Grant gave a sharp nod. "Let's move carefully." Jack and Carla exchanged a quick look before easing the suitcase out of the trunk and setting it on the asphalt. Duke stepped forward, sniffed along the seams, and then looked up at Jack with the unmistakable expression that meant, "This is it." Jack crouched beside it. "Ready?" Grant knelt opposite. "On 3. They counted silently, and Jack's fingers closed around the zipper pull. The teeth rasped as he slid it open. Halfway, it snagged, forcing him to adjust and tug again. Finally, the case gave way, opening just enough for a glimpse inside. A soft gasp rippled through the group. Jack saw it too, not the full view, but enough to tighten his chest. Fabric worn, and beneath it, the pale curve of what could have been a knee. "Hold up," Jack said, raising a hand. "Flashlight." Carla handed one over, and Jack clicked it on, the beam cutting into the dim space inside. It lit up skin-warm, flushed, trembling. A live dot. The sight jolted Jack's pulse, but his training held him steady. Grant and his partner moved in fast, carefully lifting the small figure upright. The child's arms were loosely bound with a torn belt, and a scrap of duct tape clung to his sleeve where it had likely covered his mouth. Blinking against the sudden light, the boy's gaze darted wildly before landing on Duke. Something in his expression shifted, still afraid, but no longer entirely hopeless. "You're safe now," Jack said quietly, kneeling until they were island. "We've got you." "It was dark," the boy whispered. "I know," Jack replied gently. "But you're out now. We'll get you somewhere warm." Grant wrapped a blanket around him, checking for injuries. The boy flinched when his ankle was touched, but seemed otherwise unharmed, frightened, thirsty, but alive. Carla leaned toward Jack. "We'll need his statement as soon as he's stable." Jack's gaze flicked toward the direction the suspect had run. "And we need him in cuffs." 2 units were still sweeping the area. Reports were coming in from witnesses who'd seen a man matching the description sprinting toward a wooded lot behind the strip mall. Jack relayed the update over the radio, his voice clipped but calm. Duke stayed near the boy, lying down but alert, ears twitching at every sound. The child reached out tentatively, brushing his fingers over the dog's head. For the first time since the suitcase was opened, the knot in Jack's chest eased. That simple connection, a terrified child finding comfort in a steady companion, was why he wore the badge. "Let's get him in the ambulance," Grant said, rising with the boy in his arms. As they moved, Jack noticed the crowd that had gathered behind the police line. Some held up phones to record, others stood silent, watching. The story would be everywhere within hours. But Jack's attention stayed on the boy, and on Duke, still keyed up and ready. Because finding the victim was only half the job. The other half was making sure whoever put him there never got another chance, and Duke wasn't finished. The ambulance doors shut with a solid thunk, sealing the boy inside. Jack paused, looking through the narrow window as Grant adjusted an oxygen mask over the child's face. The boy's eyes kept searching for Duke. Jack gave a short whistle. Duke trotted over, tail low but wagging, and poked his head inside the open side door. The boy's lips moved too softly for Jack to hear, but a faint smile curved at the edge of his mouth. When the medic waved them off, Duke stepped back reluctantly. The ambulance pulled away, siren cutting through the humid afternoon air. Jack turned toward the sedan. The trunk still hung open, the frayed blanket spilling over the edge, a stark reminder of how close this had come to ending differently. In the span of 15 minutes, the grocery store lot had changed completely. Word had spread, and shoppers, who moments ago had been heading inside, now clustered together, murmuring, their eyes flicking between the car and the officers who surrounded it. Phones were everywhere, people recording, some even streaming live. At the edge of the crowd, a teenager in a red ball cap spoke into his camera like he was hosting a breaking news segment. "Folks," he said, sweeping the lens toward the scene, "you won't believe this, but they just pulled a kid out of..." Sir," Officer Mendez cut in sharply, stepping into his frame. "Back up." The teen rolled his eyes but shuffled a few feet away, still holding his phone high. Jack didn't care about the footage, the truth would be public soon. Enough. What bothered him was the atmosphere brewing in the lot. Too many people, too many unknowns. And somewhere close, the man who had run was still at large. "Any sign of our runner?" Jack called to Officer Harris, who was returning from the strip mall side. "Nothing yet," Harris replied, shaking his head. "Witnesses say he cut through the trees behind the laundromat. Once you hit that creek bed, you've got a dozen ways out." Jack's eyes swept the perimeter. He'd chased enough suspects to know some tried to circle back once they thought the heat had died down. If this guy was capable of locking a child in a suitcase, He'd try anything. Duke gave a low, sharp breath beside him, his nose working. The air Jack followed the dog's gaze toward the north end of the lot, where a silver pickup had just rolled in. The driver sat for a moment with the engine idling, then shut it off and climbed out. Sunglasses in fading light, ball cap pulled, low. Jack felt his pulse notch higher. The man's movements were casual on the surface, but every detail, the measured pace, the slight turn of the head to take in the officers. The crowd, the open trunks, gestured he was taking stock. Duke, Jack murmured, voice low, Mark. The dog's posture changed instantly, tense, focused, ready. Jack began weaving through the crowd, toward the man. Excuse me, sir, Jack called, his tone even but carrying. The man turned slightly. Yeah, you just shopping today? Jack asked, as if making small talk. Yeah, just grabbing a few things. Why? Before Jack could respond, Duke barked sharp, deliberate, the same signal he'd given at the trunk. The man flinched, his hand twitching toward his pocket. Hands where I can see them, Jack said, the edge in his voice unmistakable. The crowd went silent. Mendes closed in from one side, her hand near her holster. Harris moved in from behind. The man hesitated, then slowly raised his hands. What's this about? He asked. We'll get to that, Jack said, without blinking. Name. The man's mouth opened, then shut again. Duke gave another single, deliberate bark. A murmur passed through the onlookers. That's him, isn't it? A kid whispered to his mother, but the words carried. The man's jaw tightened. Turn around, Jack ordered, nodding to Harris. Pat him down. The search turned up a folding knife and a cheap, prepaid phone. Harris held them up. We're going to walk back to my car and have a conversation, Jack said evenly. As they started moving, the man cast a quick glance toward the sedan. Jack didn't miss it. The flicker of recognition, the flash of calculation. Duke didn't miss it, either, pressing closer to Jack's leg. Steady and unshakable. They were getting close to the truth, Jack could feel it. But his instincts told him this was only the start. The suspect's eyes kept darting to the cruisers, the crowd, the gaps between parked cars, like he was mapping an escape. They were halfway to the cruiser when it happened. The man twisted, hard, slamming back into Harris and breaking free. In a single motion, he bolted toward the far end of the lot. Stop! Jack shouted, already breaking into a run. At the command. Duke launched forward, claws scraping the asphalt. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, phones snapping up to record. The suspect weaved between cars in sharp angles, but Duke was relentless, cutting the path tighter than any human could. Jack sprinted after them, his breath measured. The rhythm of someone who'd done this 100 times before. The suspect veered sharply toward the far end of the lot, vaulting over a low hedge. Jack was just a step behind, his boots snagging on a branch before he cleared it. Duke never broke stride. He leapt cleanly over the hedge and landed with such force that the suspect instinctively glanced over his shoulder in alarm. That moment of hesitation was all it took. Duke lunged forward, closing the distance in a few long strides. Take him, Jack ordered. Duke sprang, locking his teeth onto the man's forearm in a precise control bite, firm enough to stop him instantly, without inflicting unnecessary injury. The suspect's legs gave way as he cried out, twisting to free himself. Duke held fast, using his weight to force the man down into the grass. Jack reached them seconds later, dropping to one knee with one hand gripping Duke's harness while the other wrenched the suspect's arm behind his back. Harris arrived moments after, snapping cuffs onto the man's wrists. Got him, Harris said between breaths. Jack gave the release command, and Duke immediately let go, stepping back, but keeping his gaze locked on the suspect, daring him to make a move. The man was pale and sweating, breathing heavily. You don't know what you're dealing with, he spat. Jack's tone stayed even. Then why don't you explain it to me? The man clamped his mouth shut. Jack glanced at Harris. Let's get him in the car. We'll sort it out downtown. As they walked him back, the noise from the crowd at the front of the lot swelled. Mendes was holding them back, but people were edging closer to the sedan, whispering and pointing toward its open trunk. A knot of tension twisted tighter in Jack's stomach. When they reached the cruiser, he saw Carla step away from the vehicle, phone pressed to her ear. Her expression was grim. "Jack," she said quietly, lowering her voice. "Dispatch just confirmed something. The license plate checks out clean, but the VIN matches a stolen vehicle out of Illinois from 2 days ago." Jack muttered a curse. "Our guy's been on the move. He didn't steal that car for a grocery run." "Exactly," Carla said, "and there's more. The missing child from that Illinois case. The description matches the boy we just pulled from that suitcase." Jack's jaw tightened. The uneasy feeling that had been sitting in his gut since Duke's first bark now sharpened. This wasn't some chance abduction. It was deliberate, part of something bigger. In the back of the cruiser, the suspect glared from behind the glass. Duke stayed close to Jack's side, eyes still fixed on the man. "Good work, partner," Jack murmured, resting a hand on the dog's back. Duke's muscles were still taut, but beginning to relax. Carla looked toward the restless crowd. "They won't stay back much longer." "Should I clear the scene?" "Yeah," Jack said. "Have the sedan towed in for processing. Get statements from anyone who saw him before we got here. And make sure someone rides with the boy to the hospital until his family arrives." As officers moved to carry out the orders, Jack cast a final glance at the trunk. The blanket still hung there, a silent reminder of how close they'd come to a different ending. He didn't yet know how many others might be involved, or if more children were out there. But one thing was certain: without Duke, they wouldn't have found the boy, and Timor caught the man who put him there by the time Jack stepped away from the cruiser. The sedan was already hitched to a tow truck. The suspect sat handcuffed inside the patrol car, staring into the distance. His jaw set. He hadn't spoken since Harris read him his rights. Duke was calmer now, breathing steady, but his eyes stayed locked on the man like he was committing every detail to memory. Jack gave him a reassuring pat, though his own thoughts were far from settled. Carla approached with a clipboard. "Witness statements are coming in. A few people saw him hanging around near the cart corral earlier. One says he was pacing between cars, peering inside. Another swears they saw him open the sedan's trunk, then slam it shut again." Jack's eyes shifted toward the trunk. "Anyone see where he came from before that?" "Not yet," Carla said, hesitating before lowering her voice. "Jack, we found something in the back seat." She handed him a clear evidence bag containing a small, bright blue backpack with cartoon rockets printed across it. "The boys?" Jack asked. Carla nodded. "Name tag inside matches the missing person report from Illinois." Jack closed his eyes briefly, picturing the boy in the ambulance, tiny hands gripping a blanket, eyes searching for Duke. "You know what this means?" Carla said quietly. "Yeah," Jack replied. "It means this wasn't random. And if he'd crossed state lines, he wasn't finished." They didn't need to say it aloud. Federal jurisdiction was about to take over. Before he could add more, Jack's radio crackled to life. "Unit 12, be advised. The boy is stable at St. Mary's. Mild dehydration, some bruising, but he's talking." Jack let out a slow breath. "Copy that." Carla offered a faint smile. "Want to head over?" "Yeah," Jack said, glancing at Duke. "But first, we've got one more job here." They returned to the sedan, where the tow operator waited for the final go-ahead. Jack crouched beside Duke and gave the search command. The dog leapt into the back seat, nose sweeping over the upholstery. He paused at the floorboard, sniffing hard, then moved to the front. His tail went rigid at the glove compartment. Jack opened it, revealing a jumble of papers, snack wrappers, and a burner phone, identical to the one found on the suspect. He bagged it as evidence, giving Duke a scratch between the ears. "Good work." They were nearly finished when Duke returned to the trunk. Jack followed, lifting the lid fully. The blanket was gone, but the air still carried a faint, stale odor, one that clings to places where fear has lingered. Duke sniffed, then pawed at a shallow groove near the spare tire compartment. "Hold on," Jack said. He pried the panel up, revealing a plastic grocery bag containing rope, duct tape, and a folded road map. A thick black line ran from Chicago to Marin Falls, ending right at the grocery store where they stood. Jack's jaw set. Hard. This was no impulsive act, it had been carefully planned. By the time they reached St. Mary's, the sun was sinking, casting the sky in warm amber and muted pink. Jack parked in the emergency zone and stepped out, Duke padding close at his side as they made their way to the pediatric wing. Inside, the boy was propped up in bed with a juice box in hand. His face lit up the instant he spotted Duke. "Hey, partner," Jack said softly, nodding toward the dog. "Brought someone to see you." Setting the juice aside, the boy stretched out a hand. Duke walked over and rested his chin on the edge of the bed. The boy buried his fingers deep into the dog's fur, holding on like he never wanted to let go. Jack waited a moment before speaking. "I'm Jack, this is Duke. Can I ask your name?" The boy hesitated, then said, "Ethan." "That's a strong name," Jack replied with a small smile. "Ethan, do you remember how you ended up here?" Ethan's eyes flicked toward the door before returning to Duke. "A man said my mum was sick. He told me to come with him, but then he put me in that box. It was dark. I couldn't move." Jack's grip tightened on the back of a chair, but his voice stayed steady. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." Ethan's gaze dropped to Duke. "He found me, yeah," Jack said quietly. "He sure did." Outside, Jack met with Grant, who had stayed until Ethan was stable. "Physically, he's fine," Grant said. "Mentally, that's going to take some time," Jack nodded. "We'll get victim services and the feds involved. As for the suspect, with the interstate factor, the charges are going to stack: kidnapping, unlawful restraint, transporting a minor across state lines. He's not getting out anytime soon." As they headed for the exit, Duke stayed close, his tail brushing against Jack's leg. "Not bad for a day's work, huh?" Jack said. Duke looked up, eyes bright and tongue lolling slightly, almost like a grin. For the first time since hearing Duke's bark in the parking lot, Jack felt his chest loosen. By nightfall, Marion Falls had settled into the soft blue-gray calm that follows a summer day. The grocery store lot, once buzzing with tension and whispers, now stood nearly empty. The sedan was gone, the crime scene tape taken down, the last curious onlookers drifting home with stories to share. Jack stood in the station's back lot, the air carrying the scent of cut grass and warm asphalt. Duke lay stretched at his feet, breathing slow and steady, his eyes still alert even in rest, a dog who never truly stopped working. Inside, the suspect sat in an interrogation room, silent behind one-way glass. Federal agents had arrived less than an hour after the arrest, crisp suits standing out against the small-town setting. They took over questioning, files in hand, ready to push the case far beyond Marion Falls. Jack didn't mind passing it on. His job had been to catch the man. Making sure he could never harm another child, that was the court's role now. Carla stepped outside, carrying 2 styrofoam cups of coffee, handing one to Jack. "You look like you need this," she said. He nodded. "Thanks. How's Ethan?" "He's with his mum. She got here about 20 minutes ago." A smile crossed her face. "You should have seen it, Jack. She walked in, and that kid practically flew into her arms." Jack's grip tightened on the cup. "That's the part I don't get to see enough of, the ending where everyone makes it home safe." Carla glanced at Duke. "You know he's never going to forget today, right?" He sensed something was wrong before any of us did. Jack's smile was faint. "Yeah, he always does." Later that night, Jack drove toward the edge of town, where streetlights gave way to open country roads. Cool night air streamed through the windows. Duke sat tall in the passenger seat, ears forward, cataloging every sound and scent that passed. They pulled into Jack's driveway just before 10. The porch light spilled a warm glow over the gravel. Jack parked, and Duke hopped out, circling the yard once before heading to the door. Inside, the house was quiet, the kind of stillness Jack had learned to appreciate. He poured a glass of water, set down Duke's dinner, and watched as the dog ate, with steady, deliberate bites. When Duke finished, he padded over to the couch and lay down. Jack sank into a seat, rubbing the dog's neck. "You saved that boy's life today, partner," he murmured. "No telling what would have happened if we hadn't been there." Duke leaned into his hand, eyes half-closed. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Canine unit rescues missing child from car trunk. Suspect in custody. Calls poured into the station reporters' neighboring departments. Even strangers thanking Duke. Some offered to send him treats or toys. Jack accepted the praise politely, but kept the focus where it belonged. Duke just did what he's trained to do. "We're just grateful. Ethan's safe." By midday, Ethan and his mother were on a plane back to Illinois, escorted by a federal marshal. Before leaving, they stopped at the station. Ethan ran straight to Duke, wrapping both arms around his neck. "Duke, thank you for finding me," he said into the dog's fur. Duke stood still, letting the boy hold on until he was ready to let go. Jack crouched down to meet Ethan's eyes. "Take care of yourself, okay? You're a tough kid. You got through something a lot of adults couldn't." Ethan nodded, keeping a hand on Duke until his mother gently led him away. That night, Jack sat on the back porch under a sky so clear the stars looked sharp enough to touch. Crickets filled the air. Duke rested his head on Jack's boot. "You know," Jack said quietly, "we don't get to choose the calls we answer, but some of them stick with you. This one's going to be one of those." Duke stayed still, breathing steady, carrying the same quiet readiness he'd had from that first bark in the parking lot. For Jack, the job was often about paperwork, traffic stops, and neighbor disputes. But every so often, it was about something bigger, chance to tip the scales. To make sure at least one story ended the right way. And this time, that ending belonged to Ethan. The suspect would face a long list of charges. The case would wind through the courts. The headlines would fade. Life in Marion Falls would return to its steady rhythm. But Jack knew he'd never forget the sound of Duke's bark. The rush to the sedan, and the sight of a frightened boy stepping back into the light. Some days, being a cop was about enforcement. Other days, it was about rescue. And on the best days, it was about both with a partner who didn't need words to understand the mission. Jack reached down, scratching behind Duke's ears. "We did good, buddy, real good." Duke's tail thumped twice against the porch.